Hi, guys. So my parents recently received a terrible punishment for screwing me over, and I told them that they completely deserved every bit of it, and I'm not sorry for them at all. I kind of gloated about it and I thought that I had earned it, but a couple of my friends have told me that that was completely unnecessary. I'm 17, male, and in a couple of weeks, I'm supposed to be starting college. I had applied to several business schools outside our state because I wanted to stay away from my parents as much as possible, and I didn't think that they were going to miss me either. I was right about that, but they still ended up going behind my back to withdraw my application from my college of choice, which I only found out about recently. And it was all because of my brother, since he's an insecure and jealous brat, and can't stand to see me happy or succeeding. He's been flunking out of school for the last couple of years, and no matter how hard he tries, he's always failing at something. I know what his problem is, it's just that he's more interested in how he appears to people and how the so-called cool kids perceive him rather than his academics, and for some reason, my parents don't seem to see that. I have literally never seen my brother studying when he's at home, and that's part of the problem. But instead of trying to do something about that, my parents have taken him to a bunch of specialists in the past couple of months to find out whether he has any learning disabilities that preventing him from doing well after his high school counselor had a talk with our parents and told them that he's been doing terribly at school and they need to do something about it. He's 2 years away from graduating, and he needs to pull up his grades or he will not be accepted into any half-decent colleges and get stuck in community college, and that's what got my parents involved, the idea of their darling son having to go to community college. I personally didn't care about that situation at all. My parents could come up with whatever excuse they wanted for their favorite son's failures. It's hardly my business. I was more interested in my future and making sure that I got into a good business school so I could do well and stay away from my family. And in order to make sure of that, I also applied to Stanford. Everyone knows that Stanford is a pretty big deal, and I had been hoping that I would get accepted because my grades are not that bad, and a couple of my friends had told me that they would expect me to get accepted, so I went for it. Even if I didn't get accepted, I would be fine with it because at least I had tried to get in. But I don't think my parents were fine with it because apparently, a few days after I sent in my application, they sent an email pretending to be me and withdrew my application without my knowledge, so I wouldn't even stand a chance. Recently, I started hearing back from all the colleges that I had applied to, and I've been accepted into most of them, which is good news for me since when the time comes, I'll have many options to choose from. But I was just a little put off by the fact that I hadn't received any response from Stanford at all. Usually, even if it's to reject somebody, at least they do send something. Strangely enough, I hadn't received any word, so I was beginning to get very iffy about it. I couldn't stay patient for much longer, since my friends had started asking me about Stanford and I couldn't exactly tell them that I hadn't heard back from them at all. When I tried checking, I couldn't find my application status on their admissions portal, and that's when I started thinking that this was getting weird. I even checked my email, including the spam section, and there was nothing. In the end, without any other options left, I decided to call the admissions office to check out what was going on because I thought there must have been some glitch. And later on, they called me back and told me that I had withdrawn my application by email, and that's why they hadn't bothered to reach out to me because of that. I refused to believe it at first because I thought that was impossible, so I told them that there must have been some confusion because I specifically remember having applied, and they told me that they had received an email to withdraw my application days after I had applied, and that's why they had canceled it. They couldn't speak to me for long because obviously, they had work to get to, so I had to spend the entire day in shock. I kept trying to find something to explain what just happened, but there was nothing, and in the end, I had to accept the unpleasant reality that somebody else had sabotaged me. At first, my mind only went to my brother because I couldn't imagine anybody else who would be so jealous of me that they would try to do something like this. But his behavior didn't seem to be any different around me. He was still cocky and arrogant, and really annoying, but I knew that if he had done something like this, he would be trying to rub it in my face. And he wasn't doing that, so I had my doubts about whether he was actually the culprit. But a couple of days after I learned what had happened, I decided to confront him because I was going crazy, not knowing the truth. When I went into his room to ask him about it, he just looked really confused, and I thought that was genuine, but I don't trust him at all. So I decided to try and grill him, and he got annoyed, and he started yelling at me, telling me that he didn't even know how to access my email, and if he had known, he would have probably withdrawn from every college that I had applied to, so I would not have any options either, and I wouldn't be prancing around the house constantly celebrating all acceptance emails. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way, especially since I was already really upset with whatever had happened. So I started yelling at him, and soon enough, we were fighting. And I meant a physical fight, so as soon as our parents heard yelling, they came to his room to break us apart, but I don't know what had gotten into me. I started acting completely psychotic. Maybe it was the fact that somebody had sabotaged me on purpose, because things like this don't just happen on their own, and I was feeling very frustrated, and I guess I was trying to take it out on him. My parents were trying really hard to stop me from trying to beat him up, but I was being totally vicious, and eventually, my dad had to hold me back. My mom told me that it was they who had withdrawn my application and not my brother. That was when I completely froze and stopped trying to beat my brother up because it was totally unexpected. I felt betrayed, hurt, and blindsided all at once, and nobody in the room even knew what to do. For a couple of seconds, all of us just stood there silently because I was trying to think of something to say to them and process my feelings, but there was nothing that I wanted to say. I was literally in shock, and when I did not say anything, my mom started trying to explain what had happened. She had already started crying, and she told me that she and my dad had always had access to my email because before I got my personal laptop, I used to do everything on my dad's laptop. When I got my own, I guess I should have logged out from everyone else, but I forgot because, at the time, it did not seem important. And when I started to apply to colleges, it was around the time that my brother's high school counselor had told my parents that he needed to do something about his grades or he wouldn't have any choice, but to go to community college eventually. It was quite bad because she had also compared him to me since we went to the same high school and told our parents that I wanted to go to business school. I had several options, but when the time came, my brother wouldn't be able to have the same options. She had advised my parents to have my brother speak to me so he would be able to get on the same track academically and do better, and even asked them to have me tutor my brother. Obviously, it was well intentioned on her part, and she was just trying to look out for my brother since she had no idea that he and I had such a terrible equation. But my parents took it the other way, and they started thinking about how negatively it must impact my brother to know that I was doing so much better than him, and they started to think that maybe it was the pressure of having to outperform me or at least be equal to me that was getting to him. So they had been quite worried about him, and my dad had suggested the idea of going through my email and checking out what colleges I was applying to, since I had never spoken to them about it, just to make sure that these colleges were all on a normal and achievable level and wouldn't make my brother feel even more inferior to me. Most of them were, but then, they noticed that I had also applied to Stanford, and they immediately realized that if I got accepted, it would probably ruin my brother's mental health, since then he would always end up getting compared to me, his high-achieving older brother who went to Stanford and got a degree in business. So they thought about it for a couple of days, and then, my mom suggested that maybe they could withdraw without me even knowing since they had access to my email, so they knew my application ID and stuff. It would be quite sly and unethical, but she thought that at least that would help the situation, since then, my brother wouldn't have to deal with the shame of doing badly in comparison to me. So then, they threw around that idea for a couple of more days, and eventually, my parents decided that this would be the best thing to do for our family and withdrew my application. Since it was still in the application stage, they only followed up electronically by sending a confirmation mail to make sure that I actually wanted to withdraw, and my parents did it all on my behalf. They made sure not to leave a paper trail by deleting all of those emails, and they got lucky that I didn't check the application portal since I had assumed that any further communication would be conducted by email. That's how it's usually done, and also, I was busy with my finals and stuff. I had also applied to a bunch of other colleges, and I wasn't overly confident enough to just assume that I would get into Stanford so easily, and had been applying to other colleges as well, and those applications also took time. So I had been pretty overwhelmed for the past couple of months, and unfortunately, I hadn't checked the portal when I should have, because then, I might have been able to find out that I had been sabotaged by my own parents. Now, it was too late for me to do anything apart from just think about how heartless these people were. After my mom told me everything, she and my dad tried to come to my side to comfort me, and even my brother looked shocked. They tried to talk to me and tell me that they were really sorry about everything, but at the time, they had just been too preoccupied with my brother and hadn't thought about the consequences of what they were doing. And even now that I knew everything, they were sorry about it, but they still believed that my getting into Stanford would have been terrible for my brother's mental health. But I wasn't interested in their apologies. I had heard enough, so I shook them off and went back into my room. Then I locked myself in and started packing because I couldn't spend one more minute in that house with them. They kept trying to get me to come out of the room, but I was not going to do any of that. Once I was done packing all the stuff that I could carry, I called myself a cab and ignored my parents while they tried to talk to me as I made my way outside the house and got into the cab so I could head over to my grandparents' place. My dad's parents live closer while my maternal grandparents live slightly far away, so I decided to go to my paternal grandparents' house, and as soon as I was there, I told them everything, and I told them that I didn't want to go back home. They had always known that things were not great at home for me since my parents always seemed to prefer my brother over me, but this was extreme, and my grandpa lost it when I told him what had happened. My grandma tried to comfort me because whenever I was at their place, I finally allowed myself to cry, and while I was crying, my grandpa was yelling at my parents in the other room. I could tell that even on the phone, they were trying to defend their decision, but my grandpa was not having any of it, and he really tore into them. A couple of minutes after that, I heard him speaking to somebody else on the phone, but this time, he was speaking much more civilly and normally and was explaining the situation. When he finally came back to the living room, he also joined my grandma and sat by my side to comfort me. By then, I had gotten a hold of myself and wasn't crying anymore, so my grandpa told me that my other grandparents would be arriving the next day, and then, all of them would decide what was going to happen. He also reassured me and told me that I didn't need to worry because he was going to sort out everything for me. I wasn't sure what that was supposed to mean, but I was too tired to question anything, so I let it go. The next day, my other grandparents also arrived and we were all in the same place. Once they were there, they also consoled me and told me that they were going to try their best to fix the situation for me. Obviously, it was going to be impossible for them to get me into Stanford now, but they told me that whatever expenses I had, my college tuition, and other living expenses, they would cover all of it. That was a huge deal because college is pretty expensive, and my parents had told me right in the beginning that I would either have to work through college or get a student loan, and I had decided that I was going to take out a loan with a little help from my parents and maybe work in my free time so I would be able to pay off eventually. It had been made very clear to both me and my brother that my parents were not going to pay for us to go to college, and I guess that was the only fair thing they had done in their entire lives, because no matter how much they loved my brother, they weren't going to pay for him either. But judging by his grades, I don't think they have to worry about that since he might not even end up in college. Anyway, my grandparents told me that they would cover everything and I was thrilled, but there was more to come. Apparently, they had discussed all of this some more while I had been sleeping the previous night and had decided that what my parents had done was so unacceptable and extreme that they didn't even want to keep in touch with them anymore. So my grandparents were going to speak to their respective lawyers and name me as the only heir to their inheritance. That blew my mind because I really haven't seen that coming. I didn't even know what to say to them or how to thank them, but I still tried, and they told me that I didn't have to because, after everything that I have been through my entire life, they are the ones who should be apologizing to me that they couldn't raise better kids who would be good parents to me. Even though I was in a better mood, my grandparents seemed slightly upset, and I could tell that they were really disappointed by my parents, probably even more than me. But I still thanked them as much as I could because this was a huge deal for me, and I tried to act all cheery around them, and that seemed to make them feel better as well. All of this happened about 3 days ago, and I have been living with my grandparents ever since. My parents had tried to stop me while I was leaving, but after I left, they didn't try to contact me. My other grandparents are also here and we are all living together for a while, but my mom's parents are going to be leaving by the end of this week. They were only here to make sure that I was doing fine, and now that they know that I'm okay, they're gonna go back home. Last evening, my parents' family reached out to me, but it was not to apologize, it was to start blaming me for being a snitch, since apparently, a couple of hours before they called me, my grandparents had all collectively reached out to them and told them that they were very disappointed in how my parents had behaved and wanted nothing to do with them anymore. They had also told my parents that they were going to remove them from their respective wills and had already spoken to their lawyers, so they were going to start the process pretty soon, and I was going to be inheriting a loan since I deserved it way more than they ever would. My parents were acting all apologetic about what they had done up until a couple of days ago when I had initially found out, but the true colors started showing last evening. They started being vicious and really mean and said that I needed to speak to my grandparents and fix what I had done because there was no way that they were going to allow me to walk away with all the inheritance. And that's when I started gloating. I told them that they totally deserved this, and they had brought this on to themselves, so I was really glad that my grandparents had made this decision to cut them out of not only their life but also their inheritance. I told them that my grandparents were also going to be paying for me to go to college and they could continue to baby my brother, but it was very unlikely that he would end up in any good places, so their retirement funds would remain untouched since they wouldn't have to worry about him going away to college. I then said that they didn't need to be upset because if they needed help in their old age, I would be more than willing to put them in touch with charities willing to help out the destitute, since I was sure that all their own money was going to go into supporting my brother for the rest of his life, and it's not like they have an inheritance to count on anymore, so they had better start saving up or wait for me to put them in touch with charity organizations. I guess that was the last straw for them because after that, they started yelling at me incoherently, and I couldn't even figure out what they were saying since they were mostly just cussing at me. So I hung up and blocked them, and it was very satisfying for me. But then, I made the mistake of telling a few of my friends about it, because I thought that they would be on my side because they knew everything, but instead, they told me that there was no reason for me to say all of that, and I could have just accepted my win and moved on with dignity. I ended up getting into an argument with them, and now I feel kind of bad about it. I don't think my grandparents know about any of this yet because they haven't said anything, but I'm scared to bring it up with them because I don't want to make it seem like I was being cocky. I'm confused about what to do or feel right now, so Ida for gloating in front of my parents now that I know that all their inheritance is going to be mine. Edit, I do not have a good relationship with my brother, never have and never will. I know for a fact that it was my parents who have been responsible for always being biased towards him and treating him differently, but he is no less of a brat himself. He's a complete wannabe and a bit of a bully at school, which is pretty embarrassing for me. He has never been nice to me ever since we were kids, and that's why I have bad blood with him as well as my parents. Now getting into why my grandparents had never bothered to rescue me from my parents and get me to live with them instead, that's because there was nothing to rescue me from. They couldn't legally do anything about how my parents were treating me because it's not like they were neglecting me or isolating me. And at times, they were actually even nice to me, but we just had a very complicated and strained relationship. In cases like mine, kids just have to make peace with the situation because there's not much else that can be done. So for everyone who had been saying that my grandparents should have fought for my custody when I was younger and raised me themselves, I don't think that would have been possible since no court would entertain something like this. And I don't think my parents would have wanted to give up my custody either because it would have been a bad look for them. So if they didn't want to give it up, there was no way that my grandparents could have done anything. I myself did not think about moving out until recently when things got too bad to still continue living with my parents because I had just accepted my fate and was waiting for college to start so I could move away. I hope this explains everything regarding why I've been so against my brother this entire time and why I didn't move out until recently, since most people had a lot of questions about this. Update 1. Hi. So after giving it a lot of thought and going through the comments, I have decided that I don't owe my friends any explanation. Most of them have come from really good homes, but they have been treated well, so they have no idea what I have been through in my life. If I want to gloat about something, I'm gonna do it. I have earned this for myself by putting up with my parents all my life and I don't care what they think about it. Besides, they're forgetting that it was not even as if I had called my parents up, they were the ones who had done it, and I just responded to them in the same tone that they were talking to me. It's not wrong and I refuse to be sorry about any of that. Today, I even spoke to my grandparents about it and they told me that I should have just ignored that phone call and blocked them, but they didn't seem to mind the fact that I had been so rude with my parents. After all, they had earned this, thanks to their behavior. It has been 3 days since the phone call, and I haven't yet received any other messages from them, so I'm hoping that they don't reach out anymore. My maternal grandparents left to go home today and I was kind of sad to see them go because I don't really get to see them as often, but they told me that they would be back soon, and all 4 of them would go with me to drop me off at college when I finally start. So that's nice and I can't wait. Update 2. Hi. So 2 days ago, I posted my last update and I guess I spoke too soon about my parents leaving me alone. Today, they showed up at my house, probably because they were not ready to give up on the inheritance so easily. But they are so stupid that they don't even realize that they can't storm in and demand things like that, especially after what they have done. They should have been apologetic and acting sorry about what they had done, even if they didn't really mean it. But instead, they had a terrible attitude and started fighting with my grandparents as soon as they showed up at the door. When they saw me in the back, telling my grandparents to just shut the door and let this go, my mom addressed me directly by calling me a cuss word and then told me that I was a selfish brat for snitching on them, especially over something like this. She went on to say that it wasn't even as though I was good enough to actually qualify for Stanford, so I needed to stop acting like the victim. I flared up when she said that because it was still a sore spot for me. I hadn't wanted to interact with them, but I ended up screaming at her and I told her that I might have gotten in if she and my father had actually allowed me that chance, but thanks to their insecurities, I didn't even get that chance. When my grandparents realized that I was getting agitated, they shut the door and told my parents to leave or else they would call the cops. But my parents still stood outside the door and continued to yell about how unfair all of this was, and my dad especially kept trying to talk to his parents, and even tried to throw me under the bus, saying that they knew for a fact that if I ever got to Stanford, I would never shut up about it and that would have affected my brother's mental health negatively. So they were only trying to look out for their family and keep everything balanced as if that was a valid reason to have done what they did. After a while, my grandpa got really mad and turned on the sprinklers, and only then did my parents finally go away. My grandpa has reassured me that after this if my parents tried to show up again, he would definitely just call the cops and leave them to deal with it. So I don't need to worry about it anymore and I feel kind of better because at least I got it out of my system, even though I could have just avoided any interaction with them. But it's done now, so fine. Update 3. Hi, everyone. So it's been a couple of months since I last had any interaction with my parents and I remember my grandpa telling me that they had tried to show up again once to argue with my grandparents, but that time, he had actually called the cops and had them removed. I was not at home at the time, I was out with a couple of friends. Not the ones who had criticized me, I'm not in touch with them anymore and I'm fine with it. I realize that life gets much better and easier when you cut out the people that you don't want to be in touch with and the ones who don't care about you or your well-being. I'm only in touch with a handful of friends at the moment and of course, my grandparents. Most of the extended family is not speaking to my parents anymore since they know that we have had a falling out and even though most people don't even know what actually happened, they know that they don't want to be on whichever side my parents are on. I started college 3 weeks ago and it's been great, I've made a lot of new friends and the classes are interesting. I know it's going to be a lot of work, but I'm willing to put in that hard work and make my future better, especially so that I can eventually do something for my grandparents because the way they have looked out for me is commendable. Right now, things are great and even though I'm not in Stanford, I'm still in a pretty good college and that works because I know that I'm gonna make the best of my situation.